والله خير الرازقين.
الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء، واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم، ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد، فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله، وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وسلم، وشر الأمور محدثاتها، فإن كل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. أما بعد. My brothers and sisters in Islam, we praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guiding us to Al-Islam, to the complete way of life that guides us to those things that rectify our dunya before the akhirah. It's a system of life that allows us and enables us to organize all of our affairs. It enables us to view the dunya for what it is. It enables us to see the reality of the dunya. It enables us to focus our efforts, our acts of worship, our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it also enables us and facilitates us to nourish and enrich the relationships that we have with the creation. And for this reason, when we look to the texts of the Quran and the Sunnah, we see that there is an emphasis clearly on the relationship the individual has with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is as we would expect. But there is also an emphasis upon those relationships that the individual has with the other creation. And we see this in the Quran in many occurrences, in many instances. And from them is the ayah, which is named, the scholars and the mufassirun, they call it the ayah of the huquq al-ashara, the 10 rights, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا, and worship Allah and join none as partners with Him in worship. وَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, and then secondly, and do good and kindness to your parents. وبذي القربى واليتامى والمساكين والجار ذي القربى والجار الجنب والصاحب بالجنب وابن السبيل وما ملكت أيمانكم. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes on to mention the further rights. So the right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He is worshipped alone and that none are joined with Him in worship. To be dutiful to one's parents, to be dutiful to one's family, your kin, to be dutiful to the orphans, to be dutiful to the masakin, the poor, to be dutiful to your neighbor who is near to you in relation, who is your relative, to be dutiful to your neighbor who is not your relative, to be dutiful to the companion by your side, to be dutiful to the person who is a wayfarer, a traveler, someone who's passing through, to be dutiful to those whom your right hand possesses. All of these relations are relations that we should learn about, because they are relations that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us to take care over. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala finishes the ayah as saying, verily Allah does not love or does not like those who are proud and boastful. And this is because when the individual doesn't pay attention to the rights of the parents, when the individual doesn't pay attention to the rights of their neighbours, when the individual doesn't pay due care to the gharib, the one who is travelling, they run risk of being those who are proud and those who are boastful. And you know who the Imam of the proud and the boastful are, or is. The Imam of the proud and boastful is none other than Iblis. La'natullahi alayhi. So we find in the text of the Quran, there is emphasis on this relationship that we have with our neighbours, whether they be related to us or not related to us. We also find in the texts of the Prophet ﷺ, the ahadith, that the neighbour has an emphasized importance, and we will see some of this. And from these texts is the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, where he said, مَا زَالَ جِبْرِيلُ يُوصِينِي بِالْجَارِ حَتَّى ظَنَنْتُ أَنَّهُ سَيُوَرِّثُهُ مُتَّفَقٌ عَلَيْهِ. Where the Prophet ﷺ said, Jibreel, he carried on giving me the advice. He carried on reminding me about the rights of the neighbour until I thought, this is the Prophet ﷺ, till he said, until I thought that Jibreel would make him one of the waratha, i.e. he would make the neighbour an inheritor. For subhanallah, this is the greatest of the messengers of the malaika, talking to the greatest of the messengers of the bashar, of the insan, and he is telling him and reminding him about the rights of the neighbour, to the extent where the Prophet ﷺ said that he thought Jibreel was going to make the revelation that when an individual leaves inheritance, that the neighbour would have a share of that inheritance. And inheritance in Al-Islam is via blood relationships, or via marriage, or it is back in the old days when they used to emancipate and liberate the slaves, there is also inheritance due to that. But you see, my brothers and sisters, the fact that blood and marriage, there are such tight connections that the Prophet ﷺ, he thought that the neighbour would have a connection of this like. And the scholars, rahimahumullah, they talk and they discuss about who the neighbours are. And it appears in some of the narrations on Al-Hasan al-Basri, rahimahullah ta'ala, reported by Imam al-Bukhari in Al-Adab al-Mufrad, and declared authentic by Al-Albani, rahimahullah, that he said, or declared Hasan, sound by Al-Albani, rahimahullah, well, Al-Hasan al-Basri said, your neighbours are those 40 doors in front of you, 40 doors behind you, 40 doors to the right, and 40 doors to the left. So the neighbours are the people in your vicinity. These are the people that we should be having an effect on. These are the people that we should be having an impact upon. And due to the statements that the Prophet ﷺ made, this had an effect and an impact upon the Sahaba. Because they were the first, when the Prophet ﷺ commanded with something, they were the first to act upon it. And they were the first to realize the importance of it. And it's been reported on the authority of Abdullah ibn Amr radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma, that in his household, when a sheep was being slaughtered, he said to the servant who was slaughtering it, do not forget the share of our neighbor, al-Jar, al-Yahudi, our Jewish neighbor, don't forget their share. And then when he went to the salah and he came back, he said, do not forget the share of our Yahudi neighbor, of our Jewish neighbor. And it was as though one of the men, or one of the people who heard, took issue with this, with Abdullah ibn Amr, the companion of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And he said, do you say this, or do you ask of this, of a Jewish neighbor? And he said, yes, because indeed I heard the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam say that Jibreel alayhi salam, he kept giving me the advice about the neighbor until I thought he would inherit. These are the rights of the neighbor, and this is the mu'amala. This is the way that we interact with those around us. And this is with a Jewish person, someone who didn't believe in the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Rather, they threw accusations against him. Someone who said and believed that Uzair was Ibn Allah. Someone who said, as the Quran mentions, Yadullahi maglula, that Allah's hand is tied. And Allah Azza wa Jalla refuted them and said, rather, his two hands are outspread, subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the importance that the neighbours have in al-Islam. And for this reason, the scholars, they say that these ahadith, these narrations upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they show us the emphasized importance that the Muslim has towards the neighbour in terms of respecting them, in terms of granting them nobility, in terms of refraining, harming them, in terms of being good to them, and the rest of this. So, my dear brothers and sisters, there are certain principles by which we act with our neighbours, and there are certain connotations, there are certain implications of our conduct with our neighbours. From the first of them is that it's an aspect of your iman. When we mention the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ, it's important that we pay attention to the wording, because by Allah, there was no one since and no one before who was as eloquent, as knowledgeable, and who wanted good for you more than the Prophet ﷺ. So when he uses a specific phrase, pay attention to it, because there's a reason he used that phrase and he didn't use another phrase. He ﷺ said, Wallahi la yu'min, Wallahi la yu'min, Wallahi la yu'min. By Allah, he doesn't believe. By Allah, he doesn't believe. By Allah, he doesn't believe. 3 times the Prophet ﷺ made an oath. He swore by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Does the Prophet ﷺ, as-sadiq al-masduq, the one who is truthful, the one who is believed, does he need to swear by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to emphasize? No. But here he swore, he emphasized. And he emphasized about something very important, that this individual doesn't truly believe. Who is this individual? He sallallahu alayhi wasallam was asked, and the Sahaba said, وَمَنْ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ? Who are these people? Who is this person who doesn't believe? He sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, الَّذِي لَا يَأْمَنُ جَارَهُ بَوَائِقَهُ رواه البخاري. The one whose neighbor doesn't feel safe from their harm. This person doesn't believe. And if we pay attention to the text of this hadith, this isn't the individual who casts harm. Rather, it's the individual where their neighbor, they don't feel safe from their harm. So what do we say about the individual who throws harm their way? The person who argues with them, the person who parks over their drive, the person who makes noise and behaves antisocially. What do we say about this person? The Prophet ﷺ, he also gave us another of the fundamental ways that we believe, that we interact with our neighbours, and he linked it to our belief and to the level of our iman. Because indeed, the believer, not only do they refrain from harming their neighbour, rather what's upon them is to be good to their neighbour. For the Prophet ﷺ said, من كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فليحسن إلى جاره. Whosoever believes in Allah and the last day, let them be good to their neighbour. So if you have this iman in your heart, that you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you believe in the last day that you'll meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the necessary things that results in that iman is that not only do you keep your neighbour free of your evil and free of disturbance, but rather you are good to them. And the Muslim is a rahmah. If you take nothing from this khutbah, then take this. You are a rahmah to the people that you're around. Whether they be Muslim, whether they be non-Muslim, whether they be rich, whether they be poor, whether they're above you at work, whether they're below you at work, you are a rahmah. You are a mercy to them. And if you're not benefiting them by showing them what Islam is, then you need to have a look at yourself, because you should be a mercy. Because the Prophet ﷺ, he was sent, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. Indeed, I have not sent you except for a mercy to the alameen. What's the alameen? The Alameen is all of the creation, whether they be Muslim, whether they be non-Muslim, man, woman, child, animal, insect, a mercy to everything. And this is the case of the believer. From the principles of dealing with the neighbours is that the individual who harms their neighbour, they're committing a grievous sin. As we've shown and highlighted, from the necessity of someone's iman is that they are good to their neighbour. How about the one who isn't? It was reported or narrated by Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu, where the Sahaba asked the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, they mentioned a woman, a righteous woman, who prayed the night. So it means that she used to pray her fara'id, and on top of that she used to pray the night. She used to fast the day. She used to give the best of her wealth in zakah. She used to do all of these good things, all of these acts that got her close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, she harms her neighbour with her tongue. The Prophet ﷺ said, there is no good in her, and indeed she is from the people of the fire. She prays not only the fara'id, she prays the night prayer. She not only fasts in Ramadan, she fasts the day. She gives the best of her wealth in zakah, but she abuses her neighbours. The Prophet ﷺ said there's no good in her. She's from the people of the fire. This is the station of the neighbours. This is the outcome of cursing your neighbour. And then they mentioned another woman, and they said, what about the woman? She prays her 5, so she only performs what's obligatory for her. She gives the zakah from the dried cheese, not from the best of her wealth, from a low means of wealth. But she doesn't harm anyone. No one is the victim of her tongue, nor is anyone the victim of her hand. She harms no one. The Prophet ﷺ said, indeed she is in the paradise. This is how an individual, your actions, your conduct can raise you, both in the dunya, because when you look out for your neighbour will look out for you. And it will also enable you to raise your rank in the akhirah. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us tawfiq to pay heed to this. I ask Him to give us the success to be good neighbours, and I ask Him to make us from the people of iman and action. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. أما بعد. So the rights of the neighbour, we can summarize them under a number of points. Firstly, it is the right of the neighbour that we do not harm the neighbour by our speech, by our actions, by the way that we live our lives, that we don't harm them. And that is from the way of the believers. As the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawmil akhir, fala yu'dhi jarahu." Whosoever believes in Allah on the last day, let them not harm their neighbour. The second of the rights of the neighbours is that if the neighbour is in need, the believer helps them. The Prophet ﷺ said, and again, this is connecting all of these hadith, the conduct with the neighbour is connected to belief. The Prophet ﷺ said, the believer isn't the one who eats and is full while their neighbour is hungry. So if your neighbour is in need of anything, if they're in need of security, someone looking over their house or their car, or someone keeping an eye on their property, or if they're in need of food, because there is food poverty here, don't be mistaken, there are people living hand to mouth in this community, then help them. This is from the khisal of iman. The third is that the individual should do what they can to be good to their neighbour, to spread goodness. And by Allah, as I said, you should be a mercy to all of the creation. You should be a mercy to your neighbours. And if your neighbours are not Muslim, this is a blessing. Wallahi, this is a blessing. Why is this a blessing? Because it gives you the opportunity to call them to Al-Islam. And the best way that you can call them to Al-Islam is through your actions. through your actions, through food, through talking to them, through a good word, through smiling, through asking after their children, through showing and practically demonstrating how Islam shapes you and makes you a better person, through your conduct, through how you treat and respect the locality, through how you deal with local issues and you take an importance of local issues. And this is a precious thing. So if you have neighbours who are not Muslim, then this is a blessing, but this is also a responsibility. Also, from the rights of the neighbours is that the individual, if you have harm cast towards you from the neighbours, that you have sabr, that you have patience upon it. It may be that at times, maybe they have wronged you. But in the scale of things, remember, you're an ambassador for the religion. Have sabr. You know what? You parked over my drive or something. It's fine. Yeah, just don't make a habit of it. Yeah, make a joke of it. Make light of it. But have sabr. Yeah, if they're a bit loud, raise it in a good way. These are the rights of the neighbours, my brothers and sisters. These are the rights of residential neighbours. The residential neighbours have all of these rights and all of these fada'il, that there are virtues in dealing with them. Then how about if we switch our focus now to the neighbours of the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The principle that I said, you are a mercy to the people around you. This masjid is a mercy to this community. This masjid should be a beacon of light, not just for the Muslims, but for the non-Muslims. The non-Muslims should see us, and they should see the strength of Islam, how it rectifies character, how it cultivates individuals, how it connects individuals with the true purpose of life. And we all know and we're all aware of the distorted image of Islam, and we'll all be very, very quick to say the media and this, and that's absolutely right. But the responsibility falls upon us to show what Al-Islam is, to demonstrate through our actions. We're blessed to have this masjid, a community masjid, and we're coming up to the month of Ramadan, where we hope by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives us life to this Ramadan, and He gives us a success to come together and worship Him as He loves during this Ramadan. When we use this centre, my brothers and sisters, we have to pay heed to the fact that we're in a community, and that there are members of this community who don't know what Islam is. All they know is what they see on the TV. All they feel are the natural prejudices that they may have. And when they see our conduct, the way that we behave when we enter the masjid, the way that we park when we park our cars, parking over double yellow lines, blocking the pavement, blocking driveways. None of this is right, my brothers and sisters. None of it. And we've seen the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that the only person who believes, or none of you truly believe until they're good to their neighbour. None of you truly believes until the neighbour is free from their harm. And this meaning. So what about the individual who comes to the house of Allah to seek nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and as a result of that, or through that, they're inconsiderate, and they park over and they block someone's drive? What sin does that individual incur? Because what they are doing, not only are they, there could be an emergency, not only is it not legal, it's not road right to block someone's drive, they're committing a greater sin than that, because they're actively pushing people away from Al-Islam. Because the people will see this person, even if it's for 2 minutes, even if it's for, you leave it, you're just praying, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, doesn't matter. What kind of da'wah is this? And you're coming to the masjid to seek nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Come earlier to the masjid, and then you'll find a place to park. By Allah, at this point, if you left 5 minutes earlier, you'd probably get a space in the front row. And maybe if we all left 5 minutes earlier, then there won't be space in the front row. So people will start to leave 10 minutes earlier. And what a situation we would be in as a community if people are leaving 20 minutes, 15 minutes early to come to the front row. We would see that we're a changed community. If you cannot park properly, if you cannot keep your harm from others with your car, then don't use your car to come. Use a bike, use a scooter, use a skateboard, use rollerblades, use roller skates, walk, do something else. Because by Allah, by parking your car in such a manner, you're chasing people away from Islam. And you're putting this masjid in the firing line. And we know that the masajid, we don't need to be in any other firing lines. We should be a rahmah, a mercy to the people around us. This Ramadan, when it comes, we should seek to gain nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we should also seek to demonstrate to the people around us, this is what Ramadan is. This is the rahmah of Ramadan. So in our comings and goings to the masjid, we're considerate. Have some consideration for others. They don't know what we do. They don't know what we believe. They need you to show them. And if you're going to park over their drive and then argue with them when they come out to ask you what you're doing, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. It will only push them from al-Islam. And it will only reinforce those negative attitudes that they have. So Ramadan is coming. And we want to make an effort. We want to demonstrate to this community what Ramadan means. The blessings, a time when the angels are closer to us. A time when the devils are shackled. In the hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas, from the first hadith in Bukhari, he said that the Prophet ﷺ was the most generous of people. And he was the most generous in Ramadan, more generous than the fair winds. Why did he say that he was more generous than the fair winds? The fair wind that blows, it doesn't discriminate. The rich benefit from it, the poor benefit from the wind. The righteous benefit from the wind, the wicked benefit from the wind. The Muslims benefit from the wind, and the non-Muslims benefit from the wind. Let's make this Ramadan one where we benefit, our families benefit, and the people who are around the masjid, even if they're not believers, they benefit. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable us to become true ambassadors for His deen. I ask Him to enable us to become people of Iman who are responsible for those around us. I ask Him to increase us in Iman and make us a true community. I ask Him to grant shifa and good health for all of those in our community and beyond who are sick. I ask Him to have mercy upon the Muslims and to give what the oppressors deserve. I ask Him to enable us and strengthen us as a community and as an ummah. I ask Him to have mercy upon all of those within our community who have died and passed away. I ask Him to give us the tawfiq to prepare for Ramadan. I ask Him to accept from us our actions and to overlook our shortcomings. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم وأقيم الصلاة.